The massive chamber stretched out like a crystal cathedral, its walls made from the finest vegan crystal that caught and reflected light in ways that made the whole space shimmer. Jake Morrison sat in the human section, which was positioned way in the back corner where the lighting was dim and the acoustics were poor. This was not an accident. The Galactic Council had made it very clear from day one that humans were newcomers and would be treated as such. Jake watched as Prime Counselor Zethkar stood at the center podium, his tall blue form radiating authority. The Altarian leader gestured with 4 arms while speaking in his melodic language, which the translation system converted to standard galactic speech. The primitive species from the third planet of Sol System will reduce their colonial expansion by 40%, Zethkar announced. They have been too aggressive in claiming new worlds. The chamber filled with sounds of agreement from the 200 alien species present. Jake felt his jaw tighten as he listened to the translation. This was the 15th restriction placed on humanity in just 3 years. They had been told to limit their mining operations, reduce their trade routes, and now cut their expansion by almost half. Lisa Hayes, his chief aide, leaned over and whispered, "Sir, this will shut down the new Colorado colony and force us to abandon the research station at Vault 359. Jake nodded slowly. The new Colorado colony housed 30,000 human settlers who had spent 2 years building farms and cities on a world that was perfect for human life. The research station at Vault 359 was close to discovering a new form of clean energy that could power entire star systems. Both would have to be abandoned because the Council decided humans were expanding too fast. Furthermore, Zethkar continued, the humans will increase their tribute payments to the Council by 25% to compensate for their excessive use of hyperspace lanes. Jake almost laughed at that one. Human ships were the most efficient in the galaxy. Their fusion drives used less fuel than anyone else's technology, and their navigation systems were so precise that they actually reduced traffic in the hyperspace lanes. But the Council needed money, and humans were an easy target. The ethereal representative from the Misty Nebula region spoke next, its gaseous form shimmering as it communicated through chemical releases that the translators converted to words. The human military presence in the Outer Rim must be reduced by 60%. Their aggressive peacekeeping methods disturbed the natural order. Jake had to bite his tongue to keep from responding. Human peacekeeping forces had stopped 3 wars in the Outer Rim in the past year alone. Their aggressive methods consisted of actually showing up when called for help and using overwhelming force to end conflicts quickly instead of letting them drag on for decades like the Council preferred. Species after species stood to add their own restrictions. The humans could not establish trade agreements with non-Council species. Human exploration ships had to submit all star charts to Council archives before using them. Human colonies had to accept Council observers who would monitor their activities and report any violations. Each new rule felt like another chain being wrapped around humanity's future. Jake looked around the chamber at the smug faces of species who had been spacefaring for thousands of years. They treated humans like children who needed constant supervision. Never mind that human technology was advancing faster than any species in Council history. The final speaker was Counselor Vrex, another Altarian who served as the Council's military commander. His 4 arms gestured dramatically as he spoke. The human species has been in space for less than 100 years. They have no understanding of proper galactic civilization. These restrictions are necessary to prevent them from causing chaos through their primitive impulses. The chamber erupted in agreement. Alien voices created a symphony of approval that the translation system struggled to keep up with. Jake felt something snap inside him as he listened to 200 advanced civilizations discussing humanity like they were talking about training a pet. He stood up slowly, and the motion caught the attention of the aliens sitting near the human section. The conversation began to die down as more beings noticed the human ambassador getting to his feet. Soon the entire chamber was quiet, waiting to see what the primitive would say. Jake walked down the steps toward the center of the chamber, his footsteps echoing in the crystal space. Lisa followed him, along with the rest of the human diplomatic team. The aliens watched with curiosity and amusement, probably expecting Jake to beg for mercy or ask for reduced penalties. Instead, Jake stopped at the speaking platform and looked directly at Prime Counselor Zethkar. The Terran Federation formally withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. Then Zethkar began to laugh, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. Other council members joined in, creating a chorus of alien amusement. "You cannot simply leave, Primitive One," Zethkar said when the laughter died down. "The Council governs all spacefaring civilizations in this sector. There is no alternative." Jake smiled and pulled out a datapad that Lisa handed him. "As of this moment, all human colonies are withdrawing from Council jurisdiction. Our merchant fleets will no longer honor Council trade agreements. Our exploration ships will no longer share stellar cartography with Council archives. Our military forces will no longer participate in Council peacekeeping operations." The laughter stopped abruptly. Several of the more intelligent species began looking worried, but most still seemed amused by humanity's tantrum. Counselor Bricks of the Silicon Collective spoke up, its crystalline voice ringing through the chamber. "You will starve without Council trade networks. You will be destroyed by pirates without Council protection. You will be lost in space without Council navigation data." "We will see," Jake replied calmly. Vrex stood up, all four arms spread wide. In a threatening gesture, "You will return within one cycle, begging for readmission. Your species lacks the infrastructure and knowledge to survive alone." Jake turned to face the military commander directly. "For 3 years, we have listened to your lectures about our primitive nature. We have accepted your restrictions and paid your tributes. We have followed your rules even when they made no sense. But we are done being treated like children who need your permission to exist." He looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many alien representatives as possible. "You want to know what humans are really like? You are about to find out. We do not beg, we do not surrender, and we definitely do not stay where we are not wanted." The human delegation began walking toward the massive exit doors. Their footsteps echoed through the shocked silence of the chamber. As they reached the doors, Jake turned back one final time. "When you realize what you have lost, you know where to find us. But next time, you will be talking to us as equals, not as your subjects." The doors closed behind them with a sound like thunder, leaving 200 alien civilizations to contemplate what had just happened. None of them understood yet that they had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. In 72 hours, they would begin to learn exactly how much they had depended on the primitive humans they had just driven away. The first sign of trouble came exactly 72 hours after Jake Morrison walked out of the council chambers. Captain Roy Bennett was loading his cargo ship at Kepler Station when his communication panel lit up with an urgent message from Earth Command. The message was short and simple. All human vessels were to return to Terran space immediately. Roy stared at the message for a moment, then looked out at his cargo hold. The New York was carrying 15 tons of rare earth metals from the Centauri mining colonies, bound for manufacturing worlds in the Beta sector. It was a routine run that he had made dozens of times before. But routine was about to become a thing of the past. Station Master Quilks scuttled over on his 8 spider-like legs, his multiple eyes reflecting concern. The arachnoid had worked with human traders for 2 years and had come to appreciate their reliability and efficiency. "Captain Bennett, surely this recall order is temporary. We have contracts to fulfill, schedules to maintain." Roy sealed up his cargo manifest and began the pre-flight sequence. "Sorry, Quilks, orders are orders. Besides, our insurance just got voided by the Council's emergency resolution this morning. Can't risk hauling Council cargo without coverage." What Roy did not tell the station master was that 70% of the rare earth elements flowing through Kepler Station came from human-controlled mining operations. The metals were essential for manufacturing everything from computer processors to starship engines. Without human miners, the supply would dry up within weeks, as the New York powered up its fusion drives. 43 other human vessels at the station did the same. The simultaneous departure created a traffic jam that would normally have taken hours to sort out, but the human ships moved with military precision, their navigation systems coordinating automatically to clear the station's space lanes in just 20 minutes. Quilks watched from the station's observation deck as the human convoy jumped to hyperspace. For the first time in 2 years, Kepler Station's loading bays were half empty. The steady stream of human cargo haulers that had become the backbone of the station's operations was gone. On the other side of the galaxy, Dr. Amy Collins was packing up her research laboratory on Delta Prime. She had spent 18 months studying the planet's unique crystal formations that seemed to exhibit quantum properties at a macro scale. The breakthrough she was close to achieving could revolutionize computer technology across the galaxy. Her research partner, an ethereal named Wisptar, hovered nearby in obvious distress. The gaseous being's form flickered with colors that Amy had learned to recognize as anxiety. Dr. Collins, we are so close to understanding how these crystals achieve quantum coherence. Another few weeks and we will have the answer that has eluded scientists for centuries. Amy sealed her final sample container and loaded it into the transport case. I'm sorry, Wisp. Maybe the Council can find another species with our level of quantum mechanics expertise. She paused, knowing full well that humans were the only species in the galaxy that had developed practical quantum computing technology. Oh, wait, they can't. The evacuation order had been clear. All human personnel were to leave Council space within 1 week. Amy's team of 12 researchers represented the most advanced quantum physics knowledge in the galaxy, and now they were being recalled to human space. The crystal research that could have benefited every species in the Council would have to continue without them. As Amy's transport lifted off from Delta Prime, she looked down at the research facility that had been her home for over a year. The building would remain, but without human expertise, the quantum crystal project would die. She wondered if the Council understood what they were losing. Back at Kepler Station, the consequences were already becoming clear. Without human cargo haulers, shipments that normally took days to process were backing up for weeks. The rare earth metals that human miners extracted from dozens of worlds throughout the sector had been the foundation of the station's economy. Now that foundation was crumbling. Quilk stood in his office, staring at shipping manifests that showed massive shortfalls in critical materials. His 8 eyes scanned the data while his mandibles clicked nervously. In just 1 week, mineral shipments had dropped by 40%. Manufacturing orders were being delayed or canceled. 3 different species had already contacted him about finding alternative suppliers, but there were no alternatives that could match human efficiency and output. The communication panel in his office chimed with an incoming message from the Vegan Crystal Consortium. Quilks opened the channel to see the familiar face of Trade Director Yanzara, her crystalline features reflecting worry. Station Master Quilks, we need to discuss the shortage of quantum-grade silicon. Our manufacturing processes require precise molecular structures that only human refineries have been able to produce. Without these materials, we will have to shut down production within 2 weeks. Quilks's mandibles clicked faster. The Vegan Crystal Consortium was one of the largest manufacturers in the sector, employing millions of beings across dozens of worlds. If they shut down production, the economic ripple effects would be catastrophic. I understand your concern, Director Yanzara, but the humans have recalled all their personnel and vessels. I have no way to contact their mining operations directly. The vegan's crystalline form dimmed slightly. Then we may be facing the worst economic crisis in Council history. The humans were not just suppliers, they were the primary suppliers for 17 different critical materials. Meanwhile, in the Outer Rim territories, the security situation was deteriorating rapidly. Commander Bill Jackson had commanded the human peacekeeping fleet in the disputed Kronos system for 8 months. His ships had maintained a delicate balance between the warring Krovar and Stellarite factions, preventing a conflict that could have spread across multiple star systems. Now his fleet was pulling out, leaving behind a power vacuum that both sides were eager to fill. As the last human destroyer jumped to hyperspace, long-range sensors detected Krovar battlecruisers moving toward the disputed colonies. Within hours, the first shots were fired in what would become known as the Second Kronos War, the pattern, repeated across the galaxy. Human peacekeeping forces had been involved in maintaining stability in 41 different territorial disputes. Their withdrawal created a cascade of renewed conflicts as old enemies saw opportunities to settle scores without human intervention on the Council's capital world of Nexus Prime. Emergency sessions were being called as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Trade networks were collapsing. Manufacturing was grinding to a halt. Wars were breaking out in regions that had been peaceful for decades. Prime Counselor Zethkar stood before a holographic display showing shipping routes throughout Council space. Red indicators marked disrupted trade lanes, while amber warnings highlighted potential conflict zones. In just 1 week, the map had transformed from mostly green stability indicators to a sea of red and amber warnings. How did we become so dependent on one species? He asked his aide. The answer was simple but devastating. Humans had not just joined the galactic community. They had become essential to it. Their efficiency, innovation, and reliability had made them integral to systems that the Council had taken for granted. Now those systems were failing, and the galaxy was about to learn just how much they needed the primitive species they had driven away. The first week was just the beginning. Prime Counselor Zethkar stood in the emergency session chamber 3 weeks after the humans had walked out. The great crystal hall that usually rang with confident debates now hummed with nervous whispers and anxious conversations. Representatives from 200 species filled the seats, but none of them seemed to have answers for the crisis that was spreading across the galaxy. Like a plague, the holographic display at the center of the chamber showed a real-time map of Council space. Red zones marked areas where trade had collapsed completely. Orange zones showed regions with severe supply shortages. Yellow zones indicated places where conflicts had broken out or were about to begin. Only a handful of green zones remained, mostly around the core worlds that were still running on stockpiled resources. Zethkar activated the central podium and called for attention. His 4 arms gestured for silence as the chamber slowly quieted down. The situation reports from across our territory are deeply troubling. I will now hear from each sector coordinator regarding the current crisis. Counselor Brix of the Silicon Collective was the first to speak. The crystalline being's form flickered with stress patterns that made its voice sound brittle through the translation systems. Manufacturing output in the beta sector has dropped by 37% in just 3 weeks. Our factories cannot operate without the rare earth elements and quantum-grade materials that human mining operations provided. We estimate that we have enough stockpiled materials to maintain minimal production for perhaps 2 more months. Murmurs of concern rippled through the chamber. The beta sector was home to the largest manufacturing centers in Council space, producing everything from computer systems to medical equipment for hundreds of worlds. Counselor Thera of the Selenite Union spoke next, her voice carrying the weight of bad news. The Exploration Division has lost access to 60% of our stellar cartography database. Human survey ships had mapped more star systems in the past decade than all other Council species combined. Without their navigation data, we are effectively flying blind through large portions of our own territory. The admission sent shocked whispers through the chamber. Many species had grown so accustomed to using human star charts that they had neglected their own exploration programs. Now they were discovering that whole regions of space were unmappable without human expertise. But it was Counselor Nex of the Cybernetic Assembly who delivered the most devastating news. The machine intelligence's mechanical voice cut through the chamber like a blade. Military Situation Report. 17 separate conflicts have resumed in territories previously stabilized by human peacekeeping forces. The Krovar Stellarite War has spread to 4 additional star systems. The Outer Rim Rebellion has reignited with 3 species declaring independence from Council authority. Our own peacekeeping fleets are stretched beyond capacity and proving inadequate for the scale of intervention required. The chamber fell completely silent as the implications sank in. The Council's military forces had grown dependent on human tactics and efficiency. Human peacekeepers did not just keep the peace, they did it quickly and permanently. Other species preferred lengthy negotiations and gradual solutions that often failed to address root causes of conflicts. Zethkar looked around the chamber, seeing fear and uncertainty in faces that had always shown confidence and superiority. What is the status of our attempts to contact the human government? His aide, a junior Altarian named Kethver, stepped forward nervously. Sir, our diplomatic messages to Earth have been acknowledged but not answered. The humans have established what they call a quarantine boundary around their territory. Any Council ships approaching the boundary are warned to turn back immediately. Have any of our vessels attempted to cross this boundary? Kethver's blue skin darkened with embarrassment. Yes, sir. The exploration ship Infinite Quest attempted to enter human space yesterday. It was intercepted by 2 human destroyers and escorted back to the boundary. The human commander was polite but firm in explaining that Council vessels were not welcome in Terran Federation space. Counselor Vrex, the military commander, stood up with all 4 arms spread in frustration. This is intolerable. We cannot allow a primitive species to dictate terms to the galactic community. I recommend immediate military action to force them back to the negotiating table. The suggestion caused an uproar in the chamber. Some species called for aggressive action while others argued for diplomatic solutions. But Counselor Yith of the Psionic Dominion raised a mental projection that demanded attention from everyone present. Military Commander Vrex, what is the current strength assessment of human military forces? Vrex's confident posture wavered slightly. Our intelligence suggests that human military technology is more advanced than we initially realized. Their ships are faster, their weapons more precise, and their tactical coordination far superior to our own forces. How superior? Yith pressed. In the recent peacekeeping operations, human forces consistently achieved objectives with fewer ships, lower casualties, and shorter campaign durations than any other Council military units. Their success rate in conflict resolution was 93% compared to our average of 47%. The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Not only were the humans militarily competent, they were better at warfare than the species that had been fighting for thousands of years. Counselor Zara of the Aquatic Federation spoke up from her water-filled chamber. Perhaps we should consider offering concessions. Reduced tribute requirements, expanded territorial rights, greater representation in Council decisions. Zethkar's 4 arms gestured dismissively. We do not negotiate with species that throw tantrums and abandon their responsibilities. The humans will return when they realize they cannot survive without Council support systems. But privately, Zethkar was running calculations that terrified him. Human cargo ships had carried 23% of all goods moved through Council space. Human miners had extracted 17% of all raw materials used by Council industries. Human peacekeepers had maintained stability in regions containing over 2 billion Council citizens. Human explorers had expanded the known galaxy by 30% in just 10 years. Most troubling of all, intercepted communications suggested that the humans were not struggling in isolation. Instead, they were establishing direct trade relationships with non-Council species throughout the galaxy. Species that had been ignored or rejected by the Council were now eagerly working with human traders and diplomats. A priority message arrived during the session, causing Zethkar's personal communicator to pulse with urgent signals. He read the message quickly, then looked up at the chamber with obvious concern. I have just received word that the Free Traders Coalition has announced a formal alliance with the Terran Federation. The coalition controls trade routes throughout the outer spiral regions and represents 43 independent species. The Free Traders Coalition had been trying to gain Council membership for decades, only to be repeatedly rejected because their technology and social development were deemed insufficient. Now they were allying with the humans who had just walked away from Council membership. Counselor next processed this information and reached a conclusion that chilled the chamber. Analysis indicates that we may be witnessing the formation of an alternative power structure. If current trends continue, the humans and their allies will control significant portions of galactic trade, exploration, and security within 6 months. Zethkar realized that the primitive species they had dismissed so casually was not begging to return as expected. Instead, the humans were building something new, something that could rival or even replace the Council itself for the first time. In his long career, the Prime Counselor began to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. But his pride would not let him admit it, not yet. The humans would have to come crawling back eventually. They had to. The alternative was too frightening to consider. The message from the Galactic Council arrived at Earth's diplomatic headquarters exactly 37 days after humanity had walked out of the crystal chamber. Ambassador Jake Morrison sat in his office overlooking the sprawling complex that had once coordinated humanity's relationship with the Council. Now it served as the command center for something much bigger and more ambitious. Secretary of Interstellar Affairs Karen Wells placed the decoded transmission on Jake's desk with obvious amusement. They want to negotiate. The Council is offering a 15% reduction in tribute requirements and expanded colonial rights in 3 star systems. Jake read through the carefully worded message that avoided any admission of wrongdoing or mistake. The Council still spoke as if they were granting favors to wayward children rather than addressing equals. He looked up at his senior staff gathered around the conference table and saw the same reaction on every face. Commander Pete Nash, his deputy ambassador, laughed out loud. 3 star systems? We've colonized 8 new worlds since we left there. Jurisdiction? Our expansion rate has tripled without having to file permission requests and wait for approval committees. Dr. Helen Parks, the Federation's chief sociologist, looked up from her datapad with fascination. The intercepted communications from Council space are remarkable. Their trade networks have collapsed in 12 different sectors. 4 separate wars have broken out without our peacekeeping forces to maintain stability. 3 of their member species are openly questioning Council leadership for the first time in centuries. Jake leaned back in his chair and considered the transformation that had taken place in just over a month. Without Council restrictions, human civilization had exploded with growth and innovation. Mining operations had tripled their output without having to share quotas with Council oversight committees. Exploration fleets had mapped 17 new star systems without having to file detailed reports with bureaucratic archives. Research projects had accelerated dramatically without having to justify every experiment to alien review boards. What about our military situation? Jake asked. General Clark Davis activated the holographic display that showed the current deployment of human forces. Our position gets stronger every day. We're no longer bound by Council regulations on ship design, weapons development, or tactical doctrines. Our fleets can move freely through space without requesting permission or filing flight plans. Most importantly, we're receiving discrete inquiries from 17 different species about joining a human-lead alliance. The display showed human territory expanding in real time as new colonies were established and new trade routes were opened. Green indicators marked friendly systems, while blue showed potential allies. The map looked nothing like the restricted corner of space that the Council had tried to confine humanity to. Jake studied the strategic situation carefully. And our economic status? Director of Trade Relations Paul Wright stepped forward with a satisfied expression. Beyond our most optimistic projections. Without Council tribute payments and trade restrictions, our gross domestic product has increased by 42%. We're establishing direct trade relationships with species throughout the galaxy, many of whom were ignored or rejected by the Council for not being advanced enough. Paul activated a secondary display showing trade flows. The Free Traders Coalition alone represents 43 independent species with significant industrial capacity. They've been trying to gain Council recognition for decades, only to be repeatedly dismissed. Now they're eager to work with us because we treat them as equals rather than primitives. Dr. Parks added her analysis of the diplomatic situation. The Council's arrogance is working in our favor. Species that might have remained neutral are turning toward us because they've experienced the same condescending treatment we received. The Council's attitude of superior elder races ruling over younger species is becoming a liability in a galaxy where innovation matters more than age. Jake made his decision quickly. The past month had shown him that humanity was not just surviving. Outside the Council, they were thriving in ways that had never been possible under alien restrictions and regulations. Send a reply to the Council? Tell them we appreciate their offer, but we're no longer interested in membership. However, we would be happy to discuss a formal treaty between the Terran Federation and the Galactic Council as equal sovereign entities. Karen raised an eyebrow at the bold language. Equal entities? They're not going to like that phrasing. Then they shouldn't have driven us away in the first place, Jake replied with a slight smile. The response was transmitted within hours, and the reaction from Council space was immediate. Intercepted communications showed emergency sessions being called on Nexus Prime while member species debated how to respond to humanity's audacious counterproposal, but Jake's attention was already focused on the bigger picture. The emergency communication from the Outer Rim brought news that changed everything. Commander Lisa Hayes burst into the conference room with barely contained excitement. "Sir, we just received formal diplomatic contact from the Centauri Liberation Front. They're offering a military alliance against Council expansion into their territory." The Centauri Liberation Front represented 12 species that had been fighting Council expansion for over 50 years. Their technology was different from both human and Council designs, based on biological engineering rather than mechanical systems. An alliance with them would give humanity access to biotech innovations while providing the CLF with human military expertise and industrial capacity. "There's more," Lisa continued. "The Rigel Commercial Syndicate wants to establish joint mining operations throughout the unexplored regions beyond Council space. They're offering partnership terms that would give us access to star-forming nebulae rich in heavy elements." Jake realized that humanity was not just leaving the Council. They were becoming the center of an entirely new galactic power structure. Species that had been marginalized, ignored, or oppressed by Council policies were rallying around human leadership. General Davis pulled up long-range sensor data that showed the scope of the opportunity. The unexplored regions contain an estimated 40,000 star systems. The Council has been too bureaucratic and cautious to expand into these areas, but our exploration fleets are already mapping potential colony worlds and resource sites. The scale was staggering. While the Council controlled roughly 15,000 star systems with established civilizations, the unexplored regions offered nearly 3 times that much territory for species willing to take risks and work together. Dr. Parks made the observation that tied everything together. The Council's greatest weakness is their belief that age equals wisdom and superiority. They've created a system where innovation is discouraged, expansion is limited, and younger species are treated as servants rather than partners, but the galaxy is changing faster than they can adapt. Jake stood and walked to the window overlooking Earth's blue oceans. Humanity had been in space for less than a century, but they had already proven that fresh ideas and aggressive innovation could outpace ancient traditions and rigid hierarchies. Draft a message to all the species that have contacted us about alliance opportunities. Tell them that the Terran Federation is prepared to establish a new form of interstellar cooperation based on mutual respect, voluntary participation, and equal representation regardless of species age or technological level. Karen looked up from her notes with concern. "Sir, you're talking about creating an alternative to the entire Council system. That's essentially a declaration that we intend to replace their authority with our own." Jake turned back to face his staff with determination. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. The Council had their chance to treat us as equals. They chose to treat us as subjects instead. Now we're going to show the galaxy what cooperation looks like when it's based on respect rather than submission." The transformation was complete. Humanity had not just left the Galactic Council, they had evolved beyond the need for it entirely. The species that had dismissed them as primitives were about to discover that sometimes the youngest voices carry the most revolutionary ideas. 6 months after humanity had walked out of the crystal chamber, Ambassador Jake Morrison stood in a completely different kind of assembly hall. This one floated in the void between star systems, a massive space station that humanity had constructed as a neutral meeting place for what they called the Free Worlds Alliance. The station's design was practical rather than artistic, built for function instead of showing off advanced crystal shaping techniques. Representatives from over 100 different species filled the assembly hall, but the atmosphere was nothing like the old council chambers. Instead of rigid hierarchies and assigned seating based on species age, delegates sat in mixed groups where a 1,000-year-old Silicon Collective representative might find themselves, next to a recently spacefaring mammalian species from the Outer Rim. Jake looked out at the diverse crowd and felt a sense of accomplishment that he had never experienced during his years of frustrating council meetings. The Free Worlds Alliance had grown beyond his most optimistic expectations, attracting species that valued innovation and cooperation over ancient traditions and bureaucratic control. The old system failed because it was built on fear and control, Jake announced to the assembly. Elder species dominated younger ones not through wisdom or merit, but simply because they had been in space longer. That created stagnation instead of progress. In the observer section reserved for non-member delegations, he could see familiar alien forms that he recognized from the council chambers. Prime Counselor Zethkar himself sat in the front row, no longer wearing the ceremonial robes of his office. The intervening months had not been kind to the Galactic Council's leadership. Today we establish a new framework for interstellar cooperation, Jake continued. One based on mutual respect, voluntary participation, and equal representation regardless of how long a species has been traveling between stars. Dr. Amy Collins, now serving as the Alliance's Chief Science Coordinator, stepped forward to address the assembly. The Free Worlds Alliance has achieved more scientific breakthroughs in 6 months than the Council managed in the previous decade. When species are free to share knowledge without bureaucratic barriers, innovation happens naturally. Amy activated a holographic display showing research projects currently underway across Alliance space. Quantum crystal technology from Delta Prime was being combined with human computer systems to create processing power that surpassed anything the Council had developed. Biological engineering from the Centauri Liberation Front was merging with human medical research to revolutionize healthcare across dozens of worlds. Captain Roy Bennett, now commanding the Alliance Merchant Marine Fleet, presented the economic achievements. Trade volume between Alliance members has increased by over 300% compared to the same species. Previous trade under Council regulations. When you remove tribute payments, shipping restrictions, and bureaucratic delays, commerce flows naturally toward efficiency and mutual benefit. Roy's presentation showed shipping routes that connected previously isolated species into a vast network of economic cooperation. The Free Traders Coalition had become the backbone of this system, their knowledge of obscure trade routes and hidden markets proving invaluable for species escaping Council economic control, but it was general. Clark Davis, who delivered the most significant announcement of the day. The Alliance Defense Force has successfully negotiated peaceful resolutions to 18 separate conflicts in the past 4 months. Our approach is simple. Overwhelming force applied quickly to end fighting, followed by economic incentives that make peace more profitable than war. Clark activated a tactical display showing former conflict zones throughout Alliance space. Wars end faster when peacekeepers are not bound by committee decisions and political considerations. When you can respond immediately to aggression with superior force, most conflicts end before they really begin. The contrast with Council peacekeeping methods was stark and obvious, where Council forces would spend months in committee meetings, debating intervention strategies Alliance forces could deploy within hours of receiving a request for help. Where Council peacekeepers operated under complex rules of engagement that limited their effectiveness, Alliance forces were authorized to use whatever force was necessary to end conflicts quickly and permanently. As the day's presentations continued, Representatives from various alliance species stood to share their experiences of life outside council control. The common themes were freedom, innovation, and economic prosperity that had been impossible under the old system of tribute payments and bureaucratic restrictions. During a break in the proceedings, Prime Counselor Zethkar requested a private meeting with Jake Morrison. They met in Jake's office aboard the space station, with Earth visible through the massive viewport behind his desk. The blue and green planets served as a reminder of how far humanity had come in such a short time. Your species has caused considerable disruption throughout the galaxy. Zethkar began without the usual diplomatic pleasantries. Jake poured 2 glasses of water from a pitcher on his desk, offering one to the Altarian leader. We caused disruption? All we did was leave when it became clear we weren't welcome. Everything that happened afterward was the result of your system's inability to function without us. The elder races have maintained galactic order for thousands of years. We brought peace to warring species, established trade networks that benefited all civilizations, created stability that allowed younger species to develop safely. Jake leaned back in his chair and studied the being who had once dismissed humanity as primitive. You created a system that benefited the elder races while everyone else paid tribute and followed orders. When we refused to keep subsidizing that system with our labor and resources, it collapsed because it was never really stable in the first place. Zethkar was quiet for several long minutes, staring out at the stars beyond Earth's atmosphere. The view reminded him of how much had changed since humans first appeared in council space. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried a weight of reluctant recognition. What would it take for the council to join your alliance? Jake almost smiled at the irony of the question. 6 months ago, humanity had been begging for basic respect within the council structure. Now, the council's leader was asking to join humanity's alliance as equals rather than rulers. Same terms as everyone else. Voluntary membership with the right to leave at any time. Equal voting rights regardless of species age or previous authority. No tribute payments or territorial restrictions. The council would become one member among many, with no special privileges based on past dominance. That is impossible. The elder races would never accept such terms. Jake stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the thriving space traffic around the station. Ships from dozens of species moved in organized patterns, carrying trade goods and passengers between alliance worlds. The site represented everything the council claimed to provide but had actually stifled through excessive regulation and hierarchical control. Then we'll continue building the galaxy we want without them. The offer stands if you change your mind, but we're not going back to the old system of elder races ruling over younger species. Humanity tried playing by your rules, and you made it clear we weren't welcome as equals. Now we're playing by our own rules, and frankly, we prefer our version of the game. As Zethkar left the station, he carried with him the knowledge that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The age of council dominance was ending not through conquest or revolution, but through simple abandonment. Species throughout the galaxy were choosing the human model of cooperation over the council model of control. The beings who had once dismissed humanity as primitive newcomers now faced a choice. Adapt to this new reality of equal partnership, or be left behind by a galaxy that no longer needed their permission to prosper. Humanity had walked out of the council chambers, but they had walked into something much greater. They had become the foundation of a new galactic civilization built on the radical idea that all species deserved respect regardless of their age or origin. And it all started because humans had done what no other species in galactic history had ever considered. They had simply refused to accept being treated as anything less than equals.